I'm Margaret, 28. Tonight, my husband is dumping me at the Christmas party for being too poor, unaware that I'm actually the secret heiress to his company. The steam from the iron hissed, rising up to cloud the frosted window pane of our small, one-bedroom apartment. I smoothed the wrinkles of the dark green velvet dress, my fingers catching on a loose thread at the hem. It wasn't vintage, it was just old. I'd found it on a rack at the local thrift shop for $12, sandwiched between a stained, oversized t-shirt and a faded pair of jeans. "Maggie, have you seen my cufflinks? The gold ones." Mark's voice boomed from the bathroom, laced with the kind of frantic irritation that had become his default setting lately. "Check the top drawer, next to your watch," I called back, unplugging the iron. I walked to the doorway, leaning against the frame. Mark was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of his bespoke navy suit. It had cost $3,000, more than 2 months of my salary as a kindergarten teacher. But he insisted. "I'm a junior executive at Sterling Corp now, Mags. I have to look the part. Image is everything." He looked handsome, undeniably so. His sandy blonde hair was gelled back to perfection, and his jawline was sharp. But his eyes, staring at his own reflection, lacked the warmth they used to hold when he looked at me. He turned, his gaze raking over me. It wasn't a look of admiration, it was an inspection. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, his nose wrinkling slightly. I looked down at the green dress. It was modest, long-sleeved, and comfortable. I thought it looked festive. It's a Christmas party, right? "It's a gala, Maggie, the Sterling Corp Holiday Gala," he corrected, turning back to the mirror to fix a cufflink. "It's black tie. That dress looks, well, it looks like something a school teacher would wear." "I am a school teacher, Mark," I said softly, the sting of his words settling in my chest like cold lead. "And we spent our savings on your MBA tuition and this suit. I didn't exactly have a budget for a gown." He sighed, a loud, exaggerated exhale that filled the small room. "Don't start with the money thing again, not tonight. Tonight is huge for me. I'm finally going to be in the same room as Arthur Sterling. If I play my cards right, if I impress the senior partners, our lives change." He walked past me, leaving a trail of expensive sandalwood cologne, another purchase I couldn't afford but made anyway because he said he needed it. He didn't kiss me on the cheek, he didn't tell me I looked beautiful, he just checked his phone. "Hurry up," he muttered, typing a text message rapidly. "The Uber is 5 minutes away. And please, Maggie, try to blend in tonight. Don't embarrass me." I watched him walk into the living room, my heart hammering a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs. He had no idea. He was so desperate to impress Arthur Sterling, a man he had never met. He didn't know that the man he idolized used to read me bedtime stories. He didn't know that Sterling Corp wasn't just a company to me, it was the legacy I had run away from to find something real. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The dress was plain, yes, but I wasn't ashamed of it. I was ashamed that the man waiting for me in the living room couldn't see the woman inside it anymore. The Uber smelled of synthetic pine and stale cigarettes, a sharp contrast to the expensive cologne wafting off my husband. I sat pressed against the cold window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and red against the snowy night. The silence in the car wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air before a thunderstorm. I shifted my hand across the cracked leather seat, inching my fingers toward Mark's. I just wanted a squeeze, a reassuring touch that said, "We're in this together." My fingertips grazed his knuckles. He pulled his hand away instantly, as if I had burned him. "Don't," he hissed, not even looking at me. "I'm trying to focus. I need to go over the quarterly projections in my head one last time." "I just wanted to hold your hand, Mark," I whispered, pulling my arm back and crossing it over my chest defensively. "Not now, Maggie. You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under." His phone buzzed. The harsh white light of the screen illuminated his face in the dark cab. For the first time all evening, the tension in his jaw vanished. His lips curled into a small, genuine smile. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. He typed a reply rapidly, his thumbs moving with an eagerness that made my stomach churn. "Who is that?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Just work," he said quickly, flipping the phone face down on his thigh. "Vanessa, she's the senior VP of operations. She's mentoring me on how to handle the board members tonight." "On Christmas Eve?" He finally turned to look at me, his eyes cold and hard. "Success doesn't take holidays, Maggie. That's why Vanessa is a VP and why you're—" He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at my green dress. "Look, just follow my lead tonight. Don't make jokes. Don't talk about the kindergarten curriculum. I can't drag dead weight to the top of the mountain, okay?" Dead weight. The words knocked the wind out of me. I turned back to the window, blinking rapidly to stop the tears from ruining my makeup. I remembered the nights I stayed up grading papers while he studied, the double shifts I took to pay for the very phone he was using to text another woman. The car slowed as we approached the Sterling Corp headquarters. It was a glass monolith piercing the night sky, lit up in icy blue and silver. To Mark, it was a fortress he was trying to conquer. To me, it was just the building where I used to do homework in my father's office while he took conference calls. "We're here," the driver grunted. Mark opened the door before the car even fully stopped. He stepped out into the biting wind, buttoning his jacket, straightening his tie, and putting on his executive face. He started walking toward the red carpet entrance without looking back. I scrambled out of the car, my heels slipping slightly on the icy pavement. "Mark, wait!" I called out, the wind whipping my hair across my face. He didn't slow down. He just kept walking toward the light, leaving me to navigate the darkness alone. The grand ballroom of Sterling Corp was exactly as I remembered it. Excessive. The ceiling was lost somewhere in the darkness above, masked by cascading chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. The air smelled of expensive champagne, pine needles, and the distinct, crisp scent of money. Mark didn't wait for me at the coat check. By the time I entered the main hall, shivering slightly from the transition between the freezing outdoors and the aggressive air conditioning, he was already gone. I spotted his navy suit across the room, disappearing into a crowd of people who laughed with their heads thrown back, their teeth too white, their jewelry too bright. I was alone in a sea of strangers, yet everything felt hauntingly familiar. I walked toward the edge of the room, trying to make myself invisible. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets weaved through the crowd with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, caviar on blinis, truffle arancini. I remembered stealing these from the kitchen when I was 10, hiding under the long tables while my father charmed investors. "Excuse me, miss?" I flinched, turning around. An older man was standing near a large ice sculpture of a reindeer. He was struggling with a napkin and a glass of red wine that was dangerously close to tipping over. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his hands were shaking slightly, a tremor I recognized immediately. It was him, Arthur Sterling, my father. He hadn't seen me yet. He was focused on the wine glass. My heart slammed against my ribs. I hadn't spoken to him in 7 years, not since the day I told him I didn't want the company, the board meetings, or the trust fund. I wanted a life that was mine. He had called me ungrateful. I had called him a tyrant. "Here, let me help you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I instinctively reached out, steadying the glass in his hand before it could spill onto the pristine white carpet. Arthur looked up. His eyes, the same steel gray as mine, widened. The polite "thank you" died on his lips. He froze, the noise of the party fading into a dull roar around us. "Margaret?" he breathed. He looked older. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair completely silver now. He looked tired. "Hello, Arthur," I said, using the formal name I had adopted when I left. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't hug him either. I didn't think you'd come," he stammered, looking at me as if I were a ghost. "I sent the invitation to your old email every year, but you never—" "I didn't come for you," I cut in gently, but firmly. "My husband works here. He's a new junior executive. Mark Davidson." Arthur's brows furrowed. "Davidson? I don't know the name, but there are so many new faces." He looked at my green velvet dress, then at my face, searching for something. "You look happy, Margaret. Are you happy?" It was the one question I couldn't answer honestly. Not tonight. Not with Mark ignoring me across the room. "I'm living my own life," I said evasively. "That's what matters, isn't it?" Before he could respond, a shrill laugh cut through the air. I looked over Arthur's shoulder. Mark was standing by the bar, leaning close to a tall, stunning woman in a red silk dress that looked like it cost more than my car. She had a hand on his arm. He was beaming at her, a look of total adoration on his face. "Is that him?" Arthur asked, following my gaze. His voice had lost its vulnerability. The CEO edge was returning. "Yes," I whispered. "That's him." Arthur narrowed his eyes, studying Mark, then the woman in the red dress. He remained silent, but I saw a flicker of something dangerous in his expression. He wasn't looking at a junior executive anymore. He was looking at a man who was disrespecting his daughter, even if she was estranged. "Enjoy the party, Arthur," I said quickly, needing to escape the intensity of his gaze. "I should go find him." "Margaret," he called out as I turned away. "If you need anything at all." "I'm fine," I lied, and I walked away from the billionaire CEO straight toward the man who was about to break my heart. I didn't have to go find Mark. He found me. As I took a step toward the bar, Mark peeled himself away from the woman in the red dress. Vanessa, I assumed. He intercepted me with a tight grip on my elbow, his fingers digging into the velvet of my sleeve. He didn't look happy to see me. He looked like a bomb disposal technician trying to contain an explosion. "Not here," he muttered, steering me sharply to the left. "Mark, you're hurting me," I said, trying to pull my arm back, but his grip didn't loosen. He dragged me away from the warmth of the ballroom and into a small, semi-private alcove near the emergency exits. It was quieter here, the festive jazz music dampened by the thick velvet curtains. The air was cooler, drafting in from the glass doors that led to the snowy terrace. He finally let go of my arm, brushing off his suit jacket as if touching me had wrinkled it. He took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes. "We need to talk. Now." "Can't this wait until we get home?" I asked, rubbing my arm. "It's Christmas Eve, Mark." "That's exactly why we need to do this now. I want to start the new year clean." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. For a split second, my foolish, hopeful heart thought he was pulling out a gift. Maybe jewelry. maybe a card apologizing for his behavior. Instead, he pulled out a thick, folded manila envelope. He thrust it toward me. "I want a divorce, Maggie." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The noise of the party, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the music, faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "What?" "I've outgrown this," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He gestured between us. "I'm a Sterling executive now. I'm going places. And let's be honest, Maggie, you're a kindergarten teacher. You're happy with coupon clipping and thrift store dresses. I need a wife who fits my new life. Someone like Vanessa." The name hit me like a physical slap. "Vanessa? The woman in the red dress? You're leaving me for her?" "She understands ambition," he said coldly. "She doesn't hold me back." "I paid for your MBA," I cried out, my voice cracking. "I worked double shifts at the diner and the school so you could study. I sacrificed everything for your ambition." "And I appreciate that," he said, sounding like he was firing an employee. "Look, I'm being generous. You keep the apartment. I just want out." He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket, the Mont Blanc pen I had bought him for his graduation. He uncapped it and held it out to me. "Sign the papers, Maggie. Don't make a scene. Not here." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the man I had loved for 5 years. There was no remorse in his eyes, only impatience. He was checking his watch. He wanted to get this over with so he could go back to the party, back to Vanessa. A sudden, cold clarity washed over me. The man I loved didn't exist. He was a fiction I had written in my head to justify the sacrifices. "Fine," I whispered. Tears blurred my vision, hot and stinging. I took the pen. My hand trembled as I pressed the nib to the paper, resting the envelope against the cold marble of a side table. The ink flowed black and permanent. Margaret Sterling. I signed it. "There," I choked out, handing the papers back. "You're free." Mark snatched the envelope, a look of victorious relief washing over his face. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Goodbye." "Thank you," he said, tucking the envelope back into his pocket. "You should probably call an Uber. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to stay." He turned his back on me and walked back toward the music, adjusting his tie, ready to celebrate his freedom. I stood there for a moment, listening to the muffled thrum of the bass through the heavy curtains. I felt hollowed out, as if Mark had taken a carving knife to my chest and scooped out everything that mattered. I looked at the marble table where the imaginary ink was still drying on the papers that ended my marriage. "Take an Uber home," the words echoed in my head. No, I wouldn't run away like a wounded animal. I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand, uncaring if I smeared my mascara. I was a Sterling, even if I had spent the last 7 years pretending not to be. We didn't run. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the velvet of my dress. I would walk out of here with my head high. I would get my coat, walk past him without glancing in his direction, and disappear. I stepped out of the alcove, the bright lights of the ballroom assaulting my swollen eyes. I scanned the room for the exit. Screech! A piercing feedback noise tore through the air, silencing the room instantly. The jazz band stopped mid-note. The chatter died down to a confused murmur. The house lights dimmed, plunging the crowd into semi-darkness. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The voice was deep, gravelly, and commanded absolute silence.
I froze. Arthur Sterling stood on the main stage, bathed in a single, stark white spotlight. He looked regal, holding the microphone with a steadiness that betrayed the tremor I had seen in his hands earlier. I saw Mark near the front. He was standing next to the woman in the red dress, Vanessa. He had one hand in his pocket, the other holding a champagne flute. He was beaming up at the stage, his chest puffed out. He looked like a man who thought he had just won the lottery. He whispered something to Vanessa, and she giggled, leaning into him. They thought this was about the quarterly earnings. They thought this was about bonuses. Arthur cleared his throat. Tonight is a celebration of prosperity, but for me, it is also a night of reflection. I built this company from nothing. I sacrificed time, health, and family to make Sterling Corp what it is today. The room was dead silent. Arthur's eyes scanned the crowd, moving over the hundreds of faces. For a long time, I thought I had no successor, Arthur continued, his voice softening. I have no sons to carry my name, and my daughter, well, she left this world behind a long time ago. I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine. Mark shifted his weight, looking bored. He checked his watch again. He wasn't listening. He didn't care. She left, Arthur said, his voice gaining strength, because she wanted to know what it meant to build a life with her own hands. She wanted to know if she could be loved for who she was, not for what she owned. She wanted to find truth. Arthur paused. His gaze seemed to drift over the crowd, searching. And tonight, he said, his voice echoing with a strange finality, I believe she has found her answer.
I am stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. The gasp that swept through the ballroom was audible, sucking the oxygen right out of the room. It was followed by a frantic, hushed whispering that sounded like a swarm of angry bees. I watched Mark. His boredom had vanished instantly. He was standing on his toes, craning his neck, his eyes wide and hungry. He leaned into Vanessa, whispering furiously. I could read his lips. Is it you? Did he tell you? Vanessa looked flushed, breathless, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. They both looked like sharks smelling blood in the water. Arthur raised a hand, silencing the room again. I have built an empire, he said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. But an empire is nothing without a legacy. I have spent the last few years hoping that my successor would return to me, that she would forgive a stubborn old man for his mistakes. Mark's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. She? Return? She is here tonight, Arthur said, and for the first time he looked away from the center of the crowd. His eyes moved, searching the shadows of the periphery until they locked onto mine. My breath hitched. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and sprint out the emergency exit into the snow, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. It is my great honor, Arthur boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, to introduce the new chairwoman and majority owner of Sterling Corporation. Mark was practically vibrating. He took a step forward as if expecting the spotlight to swing to Vanessa. My daughter, Arthur said, Margaret Sterling. The name hung in the air like a guillotine blade. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The crowd looked around in confusion. Who? Then the spotlight swung. It sliced through the darkness, moving past the executives, past the investors, past Mark and Vanessa. It hit me with the force of a physical blow, blinding me. I blinked against the glare. I was suddenly the brightest thing in the room. The green velvet dress, the frizzy hair from the humidity, the mascara-stained cheeks, it was all on display for 500 people to see. But I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at Mark. The color didn't just drain from his face, it vanished. He looked like a corpse standing upright.
His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The champagne flute in his hand tipped, spilling expensive vintage bubbly over his polished shoes, but he didn't even notice. He stared at me, his eyes bulging, his brain trying to reconcile the wife he had just discarded with the heiress he had spent his life worshipping. "Maggie?" he mouthed, the words soundless and terrified. I took a deep breath. The fear evaporated, replaced with a cold, steely resolve. I wasn't the wife pleading for affection anymore. I was a Sterling. I took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, gasps following my wake. I walked past the shocked faces of the board members. I walked straight toward the stage, and I walked right past Mark. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him, but as I passed within inches of him, I heard a small, strangled noise escape his throat, the sound of a man realizing he had just thrown away a winning lottery ticket.
The wooden steps of the stage felt solid beneath my feet, grounding me as I ascended out of the shadows. With every step, I shed a layer of the timid, apologetic woman I had been for the last 5 years. Arthur met me at the podium. He didn't say a word into the microphone. He just reached out his hand, his palm open. I took it. His grip was warm and firm, an anchor in the storm of flash photography that had just erupted. "Welcome home, Pickle," he whispered, using the nickname he hadn't spoken since I was 12. I squeezed his hand, a silent forgiveness passing between us. I turned to face the crowd. From up here, the sea of tuxedos and gowns looked like a blur of black and white, but one face was in sharp focus. Mark was shoving his way through the crowd. He had abandoned Vanessa, leaving her standing alone with her mouth agape. He was scrambling toward the stage, knocking into a waiter, sending a tray of empty glasses crashing to the floor. The sound shattered the stunned silence of the room. "Maggie, wait!" he shouted, his voice cracking. It was a desperate, ugly sound. He reached the base of the stage, breathless. His hair was disheveled, a lock of sandy blonde falling over his forehead. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a manic mix of panic and hope. "Maggie, baby, please!" he yelled, ignoring the security guards who were starting to move toward him. "You have to listen to me." Arthur stiffened beside me, ready to signal security, but I squeezed his hand to stop him. No, I thought, let him speak, let everyone see him. I looked down at him. "What is it, Mark?" My voice was amplified by the microphone, booming through the hall. It was calm, steady, and cold as ice. Mark flinched at the volume, but he forced a smile, that charming, boyish smile that used to make my knees weak. Now it just looked like a mask slipping off a skull. "It was a mistake," he pleaded, holding his hands up in surrender. "The papers, the divorce, I didn't mean it. I was stressed. The new job, the pressure. I just snapped. You know I love you, right? I did it for us. I wanted to succeed for us." A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs went through the crowd. Everyone knew exactly what had happened. They had seen him with Vanessa. They had seen him ignore me. "For us?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You told me I was dead weight, Mark. You said you needed a wife who fit the part." "I was wrong," he cried, sweat beading on his upper lip. He took a step up the stairs, reaching for the hem of my velvet dress. "I was an idiot. Please, honey, let's go home. Let's just go home and talk about this. We can fix this." He looked so small from up there, so pathetic. I realized then that I didn't hate him. I pitied him. He had spent his whole life chasing gold, never realizing he was holding a diamond until he threw it away. I reached into the pocket of my dress, a habit I'd picked up because cheap dresses rarely had pockets, but this one did. My fingers brushed against the cold plastic of my phone, but I didn't pull it out. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "I shouldn't have stayed at the party." Mark's face lit up with hope. "Exactly! Let's go! I'll call the car." I shook my head slowly, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. "I told you to take an Uber," I said softly but clearly, "but I think I'll take the company limo instead." The crowd erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of approval, laughter mixed with cheers. Mark froze, his hand still outstretched, his face crumbling as the realization hit him. It was over.
Arthur didn't need to shout. He simply nodded at the two broad-shouldered men standing at the edge of the stage. They moved with the silent efficiency of predators, closing the distance to Mark in seconds. "Sir, you need to leave," the first guard said, his voice low but carrying enough threat to make the front row flinch. Mark tried to shrug them off, his indignation warring with his panic. "Get your hands off me. I'm an executive here. I'm the junior VP of—" "Actually," Arthur interrupted, his voice dry and final over the speakers, "you're trespassing. And, if I recall correctly," he looked down at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded. I reached into the pocket of Mark's jacket, he was close enough now that the guards had dragged him to the stairs, and pulled out the manila envelope. The envelope he had forced me to sign not 20 minutes ago. "You wanted these signed," I said, my voice quiet now, just for him. I tucked the envelope into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "So you could be free, remember?" Arthur stared at the envelope, then at me. The realization that he had engineered his own destruction finally seemed to penetrate his thick skull. His knees buckled, but the guards held him up. "Escort my daughter's ex-husband out of the building. He has a long walk home." "No, Maggie! Vanessa!" Mark shouted, twisting his head to look for his backup plan. I followed his gaze. Vanessa was standing near the champagne tower. She didn't step forward. She didn't protest. As Mark screamed her name, she deliberately turned her back, picking up a fresh glass of champagne and engaging in conversation with a board member. She had seen the sinking ship and jumped off before her feet even got wet. The guards dragged Mark backward. His heels skidded on the polished floor, leaving scuff marks that would be buffed out by morning, just like he would be erased from this company. The heavy double doors at the back of the hall swung open, revealing the swirling white storm outside. They tossed him out. I watched the doors swing shut, cutting off his shouts. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was respectful. Then the jazz band started playing a slow, warm melody. The tension broke. The party resumed, but the air was lighter. "Are you okay?" Arthur asked, turning off his microphone. I looked at the closed doors, then back at my father. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of trying to be enough for someone who only wanted more. I felt light. "I am," I said, and I was surprised to find it was the truth. I really am. Later that night, as the party wound down, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the world in clean, white silence. Down on the street, illuminated by the harsh orange glow of a street lamp, a solitary figure was trudging through the slush. He had no coat, just a navy suit jacket that was quickly soaking through. He was clutching a manila envelope to his chest to shield it from the wind. I watched him until he turned the corner and disappeared into the cold. "Ready to go, Miss Sterling?" I turned around. A driver was waiting, holding my thrift store coat like it was made of ermine. Behind him, my father was waiting with a smile. The room was warm.
The music was soft. "Yes," I said, turning my back on the cold window. "Take me home."